Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to make some fun greeting cards and we're going to do a lot of work with ink on our background, and then we're going to stamp some silhouette images on top. It's really a great way if you want to get techniquey in a background. It's a great way to use those backgrounds so that you don't detract from them, but you're going to use stamps that hold their own. So the first thing I've done is cut some cardstock down to, I basically have two ATC size and one cardstock that's about an A2 size, and I'm just using these little ink pads from Gina K Designs to ink up the cardstock. We're going to use a bunch of different inking techniques here to give us a variety of backgrounds. I just want you to play with your inks and have fun. The supplies that I'm using today are from Gina K Designs. I recently met Gina online. She's a fantastically friendly, wonderful woman, and I was pleased to try out some of her stuff. So another way you can get ink onto your cardstock is by pressing your ink pads down onto a non-stick craft sheet. Actually, this is a inexpensive oven liner, just like a Teflon oven liner. You meant to put it like underneath your heating element in your oven so it catches drips and things, I think. But I use it here in the craft room. It was very affordable, and I didn't have a craft mat, and this works just as well, and it's a lot cheaper than the ones that you buy online. I got this from LTD Commodities. I'm not sure if they still sell it or not, but it was a pack of two really huge ones for like $7. There you can see I've got a little bit more of a watercolory, inky, runny effect just by pressing that ink onto my mat and then pushing my cardstock into it. So there's a couple different ways you can do that. So now I was thinking, well, what if I just press the ink onto the craft mat and I don't ink up the cardstock first? What will that look like? And you know what? That gives us a completely different look. What I really love about this is the process of playing with your supplies. You can do this with any ink pads you have that are dye-based. You can do this with your dye-based markers. You can do this with watercolors. You know, do whatever, use whatever you have, basically. Even if it's just the kids' Crayola markers, scribble them on your craft mat. See what happens. What's the worst that can happen? A wasted piece of paper? And there we get a much more watercolory look. But the nice thing is you can kind of swipe it through that ink. You can pick up all the excess until you get the perfect look that you're going for. Every one of these backgrounds is going to be unique. You can kind of copy the same exact thing 10 times and have 10 different backgrounds. I didn't want to waste any of this beautiful ink, so I'm just going ahead and swiping up as much as I can. Now, as long as you don't put too many colors down, you shouldn't get too much mud. You should be able to retain some beautiful colors there. So that's what I recommend. Only doing about 3 colors, maybe 2 if you're feeling a little nervous about it, and then seeing what you got when you drag that ink through. And you can see how easy it is to wipe up just with a paper towel. Now here on this larger piece of cardstock, I decided to get a little crazy, and I'm using 4 different colors of ink. But see how I put them down on my craft mat? I've got the red up top, I got the orange underneath that, the yellow underneath that, and then the green. So all of my colors are kind of next to their neighbor on the color wheel. So when the colors blend with their neighbor, it's going to be totally fine. I'm not going to get mud. So again, I'm pressing it down. I am pushing my paper into the cardstock without wiggling it too much, just to get that first impression. And then I'll go through and just kind of pick up all that extra ink where the 2 colors like blend together. I basically don't want any white, stark white paper sticking there in the background. And I recommend when you're doing a project like this, you have a bunch of pieces of cardstock ready to go so that you can make up a bunch of backgrounds at once. It's really fun. If you do this in a batch, you do all your backgrounds together, it doesn't take more time to do 10 than it would to do 2. So you might as well get all that work done, get all the mess out at once, and then you can enjoy the stamping of it later. Don't worry about messing up your backgrounds. I decided I want this a little darker, so even while the paper is still damp, I'm going in with my little ink cubes, which I just love for their versatility, and I'm adding more color. So I'm adding my color from the pads right on top of the wet paper, and it doesn't damage anything. You wouldn't want to go with like your yellow ink pad on top of your green or red. You just want to kind of keep it in the same color family because that ink underneath is still wet and it could transfer, but as long as you keep that in mind, you shouldn't have any issues with this technique. The great thing about these techniques is that you can change your mind. I was looking at that and thinking, you know, now I think it looks a little too dark. So I'm taking some white pigment ink, pressing it on my craft sheet, spritzing it with some water to make it kind of like a, you know, milky, translucent whitewash soup, kind of. And I'm going to press my cardstock into that because I was just thinking the darker I get that background, the less my images are going to stand out from it. And I really wanted to make sure that I would get some sort of contrast when I went to stamp my silhouette images on top. So I'm just soaking up the rest of the ink on that cardstock. I know it's probably going to dry a little more translucent once that white ink seeps down into the wet colored ink underneath. So I just wanted to kind of kind of used that all up, so I didn't waste ink so that I'd have enough of a kind of impact on my background. I really want to stress the fact that no background just comes right out perfect, or if it does, it's not a regular thing. There's layers that are built up by repeating techniques and by adding colors and taking away colors and blotting colors, and keep layering until you get it just right. I love the texture that splashing the ink onto my cardstock gives. I've splashed some colored ink, I've splashed some white ink. I decided to do this again on one of these other backgrounds I had, and I find that using my ink pads like watercolors, just smooshing them on my craft sheet, picking them up with a brush and water and flicking them on, gives me a wonderful texture. It almost gives you the look of that new Distress Oxide ink that's really popular right now that just came out. I love that you can get those effects using what you already have at home. And when you think of your ink pads as like a paint, as like an art supply, you really get a lot of bang for your buck. Now, once you've done all that you want to do to it, you'll want to use your heat tool and dry it really well. I find flipping them over and drying the backside of the cards help them flatten out really well. And then you're going to be ready to do your stamping. I decided to do one more little thing before I stamped on them, and I decided I wanted a subtle pattern. So I just grabbed a white cosmetic sponge and a stencil and just stamped on texture onto the papers. I really like doing this with the white ink because it just kind of leaves a ghosty pattern on top. But if you felt like your background was a little too light and you want some dark pattern to come through, you can go ahead and use a clean cosmetic sponge or ink daubing tool, whatever you have, to add a little bit darker color here and there where you want it, like I did with this larger background. See, it's all fun experimentation, and I really think you ought to give it a try. I wanted to start off with an easier design, so I grabbed this Dreamcatcher stamp from Gina K Designs in black dye ink, and I'm just going to stamp right on top of this ATC size card. I'll put measurements for everything in the video description, as well as links to all these products, so that if you want to find them, then you can easily do that. They are affiliate links, just to let you know. I do earn a small percentage of commission on the sale, but it doesn't cost you any more. So there's my little disclaimer for you. I like to just kind of press straight down and hold the ink for a second, hold the stamp for a second to give the ink a chance to transfer. I also want to let you know my background is completely dry at this stage. If your background wasn't completely dry, that black ink might not stick on top of the white pigment ink. So I just want to let you know that. And there's also a little sentiment that came with that Dreamcatcher that says follow your dreams, and I didn't want to cram it in there with that card, so I decided after inking the edges here, I decided that I was going to want that sentiment on my card. So what I'm actually going to do is find a scrap of cardstock and ink it up like I did for the background and use that on my card. In hindsight, I probably should have just taken one sheet of cardstock and made one big crazy background and then trimmed it down into the different card pieces that I wanted. That would have saved me probably quite a bit of time, and then any little scraps that I had left over would have already been colored, and I wouldn't have to go ahead and color this tiny little scrap to use as my sentiment. But you know, after you've done the processes, as long as you remember what colors you used, it's pretty easy to just ink up that cardstock and stamp on it. Also, for being completely truthful here, I probably should have used my paper trimmer to trim this out into a strip instead of freehanding it with my scissors, because I got that cut a little bit crooked, but that's all right. I think it kind of adds to the whimsy of this card. That's what you say, folks. If you cut something crooked, you say, but look, it just adds to the whimsy. I totally meant to do it that way. I am the artist. I think I knew what I intended to do on this card. I'm using some double-sided tape to stick this down, and when you are doing inked backgrounds, be generous with the double-sided tape, because once you've wet a paper like that, it's gonna, even if you've dried it completely out, it's gonna want to kind of warp a little bit on you, so kind of keep that in mind. Now, this is not a silhouette style stamp. This flower here is really detailed, and I was just thinking that maybe if I stamped it in black, it would be bold enough to stand up on this background, but it was just too delicate, and it didn't really show up. I tested it on a piece of tissue paper because that's what I had handy. I thought, well, maybe it'll be dark enough, but you'll see when I stamp it on this beautiful background, which I was totally bummed that I kind of wrecked it. It just was not bold enough to stand up against that really bright background. So that one I had to just kind of tossed. But before I did that, I decided to see if maybe adding a little bit of ink kind of in a painterly fashion would help it. It did kind of help it a little bit, so that's something you can try if your stamping is not bold enough to compete with your background. But in the end, I think that's going to probably be tossed into the scrap bin. But it's always good to experiment. Even if it doesn't turn out the way you want, you've learned a lesson, and I think that's worth wasting a tiny scrap of paper, don't you? Now this was the stamp set I was most excited to use, and I wanted to kind of break myself in with those other two smaller cards before I really jumped into the meat of my project. I love how these images mostly were very silhouette style images, and I love that they were scene building images, meaning that I could create a scene with the different elements in this set. And I just found out, actually, as I was putting my stamp set away, that it comes with a storage panel. These larger sets have their own like 3-hole punch storage panel that goes in a mini binder, which I thought was totally awesome. And I have some mini binders, so very, very cool. So I'm going to start off with the biggest element that I plan to stamp, and in this case it is this windmill, and I am again inking it up with black dye ink. If you have a problem with your ink sticking to the background, you can always use a black pigment ink, as that tends to kind of grip the paper a little bit better, even if you have some pigment ink underneath like that white pigment ink. But honestly, I didn't really have a problem using the black dye ink because my paper was really dry. I dried it with a heat tool. I am making sure to make contact everywhere with the stamp because the table that I work on in the wintertime upstairs is not perfectly flat, and I just wanted to make sure that it made good contact. So don't feel like you have to like manhandle your stamps the way I am. I just felt like I needed that because of my table being a little bit unreliable. So now I'm thinking the next biggest item or solid item would be this farm, and I was trying to figure out where it should be because it is, the size of it is a little smaller than the windmill. I feel like it would be back further in the scene, so I was just trying to get a feel for where I need to put that. And when you're scene stamping, that's what you have to kind of keep in mind. Things closer to you are going to look bigger, things further away are going to look smaller. So as I'm looking at that, I'm looking and thinking that's going to be further up in the paper because that needs to be behind the windmill because of the scale of the image. Now, sometimes when you're using dye ink, you may notice that the ink wants to bead up on the stamp. If that happens, just re-ink it before you stamp it down. Sometimes if you're kind of hovering it in the air and you're, dilly-dallying a bit, then you might want to do that. You can see I got a little bit of broken image in the middle. I don't mind it, but that's why I waited too long to stamp it. So I was thinking of some other elements that I would like to put down. I definitely wanted that fence in there, and since that is probably my next largest piece or next smallest piece, well, it's another big piece, I wanted to get that in, and I wanted that to come off the corner because I know that's going to be visually pleasing and it's going to invite the viewer to travel through my scene. So just like if I was painting a picture, it's kind of the same element that I would use. So again, inking it up with that a small black ink cube, and these cubes, by the way, come in sets of 8, so you can easily collect a full collection of ink for not a lot of money. I'll link to everything in the video description so you can have a look. You may want bigger ink pads for your go-to colors, but I honestly love being able to have everything out on my table at once, so I am becoming a convert of the small ink pads. So I love how that gives some scale to the picture because you've got, like I said, the bigger things towards you. So down lower on the paper is that edge of the fence that's taller, and then going up on the paper is the tinier end. It's kind of going away from you, so it's appearing to be smaller. So keeping these things in mind when you're scene stamping builds scale. Gina K has a lot of really cute scene building stamps on her website. If you do enjoy that, I recommend checking it out because you have everything you need in one set to make a scene. I remember in the olden days, you'd have to collect stamps from so many different companies and, build a stash before you could create a scene, and this just makes it so much easier. I thought these little tufts of grass would be cute to kind of cluster and weight and anchor certain elements in my picture, such as the fence posts and the windmill. Maybe detract from the fact that my windmill's a little crooked. Anything you can do to disguise those little things is great. And there's a couple different sizes here, so I'm alternating them and even like overlapping edges a little bit to make it look like there's even a third different batch of grasses. So just try to think of ways that you can make one stamped image look like a couple different things. So now I'm just kind of holding the set up over my image and trying to figure out what I want to put in here. I know I want some life in here, and I'm trying to decide between the foal or the full-grown horse. I can't fit both. If I had thought about it and maybe eliminated the farm, I could have got both horses in, but that's not what I did. So now I'm trying to figure out exactly where I want to put him, and it really makes more sense to have the horse behind the fence than in front of the fence running free. Not that I don't want to see a horse run free, but generally at a farm you would see the horse behind the fence, so that's what I'm doing. So I'm going to make sure when I stamp this horse down that his feet are higher in the plane than the, I'm still trying to fit that other horse in there though, you can see. I'm going to make sure that that horse is higher than the bottom of the fence post, so it doesn't look like he's standing in front of the fence. If I had the horse lower in the card, he's going to look like he's in front of the fence. And I re-inked there. Did you catch that? Because I had hemmed and hawed so much, that ink was starting to pull away and bead up a little bit. So now I have this cute little scene that I absolutely love, but I could totally see that this set has potential to make bunches and bunches of different scenes that would go together. So if I had, like, you know, smartened up and done the entire sheet of cardstock in my awesome background, then I could have made like 4 different scenes to go in front of cards using the stamp set. But it's all about experimentation. Nothing has to be perfect. Have fun, and I really think that's what crafting and stamping is all about. Since I had a nice big area in the sky, I decided I would stamp that sentiment right on the sky. And I know that can be kind of scary. If you've got something stamped and you're really happy with it, it can be scary to go ahead and stamp that sentiment right on your card. But you know what? The way I figure it is, if I mess up, I can always stamp it on another piece of cardstock and glue it on top of my mistake. I do that all the time, so don't worry about ruining your card. Experiment. You either succeed or you learn something. That's true in life, that's true in art, that's true in crafting, that's true in stamping. If you don't succeed, you learn a lesson. Either way, you are a winner. Either way, you do not fail. I just think that is exactly what that card needed. And now I've got to figure out what color I want to mount this panel on to make my finished card. And I really like yellow, but I thought I would just try it with a few different colors I had on hand just to see if something popped a little bit better. Now I'm going to tell you my little cheapo sneaky secret here. I was at Michael's like a year ago and they had all these like packs of 60 card bases. Some were embossed, some were just bright colors, some were muted colors. Anyway, they were $5 for like 60 card bases. I bought like every package they had. I gave some away to friends. I still have scades of these cards left over, but they are so handy. Anytime I want to make a card, I just have to grab one of those, put my background on it, and I'm good to go. So it really was a wise investment in the long run. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial today. I hope you check out Gina K Designs. She's not sponsoring this video. She's just a really nice lady, and I really enjoy her products. I'll link to everything in the video description so you can check it out, and I hope you try this background technique using whatever supplies you want, because it will work with so many different supplies. Thank you so much for joining us for another Stamp School, and until next time, happy crafting!